Hey guys, Neel here. So I have a quick announcement. I am officially a YouTuber now. I just released my own channel. It's called at Neel B Parek, where I document my life living in Africa while building a national cleaning franchise. So I have about 4 episodes out right now. All of them are super action packed. The first one's about me hiking to Uganda, and the next one's a day in the life in Africa and what I actually do, and just kind of document the journey of a digital nomad living in Africa while building a national cleaning franchise. So check it out. Again, the YouTube channel is called Neel B Parek, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. What is going on, podcast listeners? Neel here for another episode of The Freedom Formula. I got a really exciting guest today, Eric Dingler. Now, normally on podcasts, I dive into a lot of business stuff, interview people about what they're doing in business. This one I found particularly exciting for me for totally selfish reasons because Eric, not only with having his own really successful digital marketing agency, is also a full-time digital nomad. Not only that, though, he's doing it with his entire family. So his wife and I believe 4 kids, which is absolutely incredible. So we're going to dive more into Eric's lifestyle, how he achieved it, and what he's doing. But Eric, let me kick it off and ask, what country are you in right now, and how long are you going to be there?
Well, the first question is easy. We're in England. How long are we going to be here? We have no idea. We don't plan that far in advance.
Jeez. So, all right. I don't even know where to start, man. I have so many questions here. So first of all,
We're limited. We're limited by our, the stamp on our passport. We've got 6 months, but we may stay all that 6 months. We may not. We just got to wait and see.
yeah, makes sense. Eric, how long have you been living this lifestyle? You sound like you're originally from the US. So when did you guys decide to pack up and head out into the world?
Yeah, so we've been traveling full time now for over 3 years. We started with a test trip and went on a 3-month test trip to Istanbul and Turkey, and then picked up some Western Europe. We were actually in Europe when Russia invaded Ukraine, and we were in Poland.
Wow.
We were able to we spent more time in Poland than we thought we were going to, because we were able to serve right there on, be hands and feet on the ground serving, refugees coming in from Ukraine. And so we got back from that test trip, and before we even finished it, our kids, all 4 kids, were on board. Went back to the States, sold 95% of what we own, put the baby blankets and stuff like that in a storage unit, and we've been traveling full time ever since.
That's incredible, man. Give me some backstory. Were you always remote? What does your wife do for work? How old are your kids? Just some basic backstory.
Yeah, sure. So I've always had a lot of freedom in where I work from. I've never had a typical 9 to 5. So for 15 years, I ran a summer camp. And so there's no typical hours in summer camp. And every year I got to reinvent the entire camp experience. And then when we decided to step out of camping, it was a church camp. We decided to step into local church ministry. And so I became a campus pastor at a multi-site church in Ohio. And then 2 years later, we decided to plant a church. So we moved to Virginia and we planted a church. So I've never had a typical office, typical 9 to 5 kind of deal. And we've always homeschooled our kids. In fact, during the COVID lockdowns, one day my wife looked at me and she's like, what does it say about our life that what everybody calls quarantine life, we call it Tuesday? It just, nothing changed. I was at home. The difference was I would go to the grocery store all dressed up with protective garb and would come home, and my wife and I would Clorox the groceries on the back deck, before we brought them into the house, before anybody knew what was really going on. And so, but yeah, so we've just always had a life that wasn't necessarily locked into anything like that. And my wife she started following these van lifers, and she thought, wow, we should live in a 15-passenger van. And I thought, I love my kids, but I got limits. And us living in that small of a space, that's my limit. So we decided to head out on the test trip. Now, another part of that backstory for to make a little bit of sense. In 2016, my wife and I decided that we felt like we were also being called to adopt. And so we
Mm.
have two biological children, and our oldest two children are adopted. And we needed to raise about $50,000 to adopt debt free. We didn't want to have debt at the end of the adoption. And so I was pastoring at the time, and I needed to raise $50,000 extra dollars, and I had learned how to build websites. So I started building websites for people on the side. Fast forward, we brought our kids home, our adopted kids home from Bulgaria about 4 weeks before the lockdowns. And so we brought our kids home from Bulgaria, but by that time, this side hustle had turned into a full business. And so
Mm.
we decided to start a nonprofit to help other families that fund their adoptions and use the business as a way to create revenue for our nonprofit so we could walk alongside others. So I stepped out of the church, installed a new pastor. I stepped out of the church and focused full time on the business. And it's been a journey. I've learned a lot. Running a business is very different than running a church.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the full backstory in a nutshell. There's a lot of parts to it. We've always led a bit of an adventurous life.
Yeah. Dude, first of all, that is incredible. How old are your kids? All of them?
All right. So they are currently 12, 14, 16, and 17.
16. Okay. And you adopted the 16 to 17-year-old, you said?
Yep. So they've been with us for 5 years.
Gotcha. Man, that's incredible. And in terms of, so currently I'm in Rwanda. I'm in East Africa. I've done the digital nomad lifestyle for a while. So I quit my job in 2015 and I backpacked for 5 years. So I was traveling from 2015 to 2020. COVID happened. Went back to Los Angeles, met my wife. She has a huge travel spirit as well. So, we kind of split time between Los Angeles and kind of wherever else we're going, a little bit of half-half. Part of me sometimes feels like, okay, this is great, but right when we want to start building a family, our life is over. There's almost this like weird franticness of like, okay, we have to travel now and do all these things because we can't do it later on once you actually have kids. I think what's been encouraging is hearing your story of you're actually doing this with fully grown kids. Can you tell me how that experience has been? First of all, are they still homeschooled? Like, what are challenges you run into? Yeah, just any thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my wife would be, so I should have brought her on. She'd be a lot better on that side of it. And she talks about this a lot. It helps people. She has her own podcast, the Digital Nomad Family Podcast, where she just talks specifically about family stuff. But so yeah, we world school our kids, and which is the same as homeschooling. It's just we leverage wherever we are. So when we were in Peru, we studied. She did an entire study curriculum on the Incas. And when we're in Europe, we study World War II, and so it just wherever we are, we leverage kind of where we are for that. And I can say the biggest difference has been, especially in our biological children, their sense of confidence. Like that was the biggest thing my wife and I noticed after about a year. Their confidence level just skyrocketed. They're a lot more. They have learned who they are, not defined by the culture they're within, because they've lived in so many cultures now, and they're definitely third culture kids. So TCK, third culture kids, TCK is a real thing. And we weren't aware of it before we started traveling, but we've learned about it. And so my wife and I have had to learn how to help our kids be third culture kids and how to live out of that. But so it's
Eric, what's a third culture kid? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so a third culture kid means they're not growing up in the culture of their parents, and they're not growing up in the culture of their birth country. Which was true already for our adopted children, and now is true for our biological children. And
Got it.
There's some differences with that. So, for example, when we do go back to the States, we've had to help our kids. They'll be sitting around with their cousins, and their cousins are telling stories about their school went on, they went on a field trip with school and they went on vacation. And it reminds one of our kids of something. It'll be like, oh my gosh, that reminds me of this one time. So we were in Paris and we went to the Eiffel Tower, or we were in the Amazon jungle and we were like out for 8 days, no Wi-Fi, no nothing. And their cousins and everybody are going, ooh, aren't you? And our kids started to feel kind of guilty about that. And we had to help them see, like, well, you didn't really, like, we asked your opinion, but you didn't make the decision to live this lifestyle. Your mom and I made this decision. And so you don't have to feel guilty about that. So it's just helping them. That's just one little example of what a third culture kid might experience.
Now, Eric, question for you. When you're raising kids in this nomadic way, like, so I didn't grow up homeschooled, right? I went to elementary, middle school, high school, and like a lot of my formative relationships are from that, right? And you're part of the system, meaning like, you go to prom, you do X, Y, and Z, you have, the first day of school, and like, there's different things that kids kind of grow up with. And I guess part of that would be, I guess my question is like, how do you feel about your kids not having that, right? When they have this incredible experience of going around the world, but some people might argue like, well, they're missing out on the social life of being in a school, in their home country, in a stable place for a long period of time. What have you noticed, and what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I would say that's true for people living in this industrial age. But this hasn't been the track of humankind. For thousands of years, nobody lived that way. And look at where we got to. So those things aren't essential. It's just, and that's kind of the deal. Like we were about to buy a house. And so we had met with a realtor and a mortgage guy. And he was like, listen, I can get you a $250,000 mortgage as a pastor. But if you give your business one more year, based upon your business returns, I can get you a $450,000 mortgage. And so we said, okay, we'll wait. And then we started just talking about like, where do we want to live? And we were looking, and it kind of just was like, wait a second. We never decided we wanted to live this way. We were just doing it because everybody around us would. It was the expected.
Right.
But why was it expected? It used to be important for people to have that because industry needed their workers to come to the factory. I mean, the whole educational system, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I mean, this is proven, we know this. It was established to create great workers. Well, we don't have to live that way anymore. And we survived as humans for years without that. So with that said, I mean, I'm going to be 50 this month, and none of my closest friends are people I went to high school with. And so, okay, why should we hold that up to expectation for our kids? But our kids have got to go to dances. We actually spent about a year in Costa Rica. We were only be there for 6 weeks, and we ended up staying a year. And our kids got very involved with a youth group there, and they had this dance. And so our girls got dresses and got to do their hair and their nails. Our youngest son wasn't old enough to go, but our older son got dressed up. My parents were visiting, so grandma and grandpa was there and got to, take pictures with them. So they still got that, that experience. But the other things they've gotten about it, we are the 6 of us, like, we have to rely on each other because on moving day, on travel day, it's the 6 of us. Like,
yeah,
we got to get through the airport together. We got to get into the next apartment. We've got to get it set up, and it's the 6 of us doing it together. And so we play a lot of card games as a family. We spend a lot of time together as a family, and we would rather our kids do that and develop. We want the 4 of them to be each other's biggest fans for the rest of their life. And they're establishing those bonds now in a deeper way than when if we would have stayed rooted. Now, I'm not knocking the rooted life. I'm not knocking public school. Like, if that's right for you and your family, that's great. Just my question is, did you choose to do it? Or are you just doing it because you're just going along with the flow. That's all.
Yeah. No, it's such a good question because, like, for me, and I'm sure a lot of people, they want their kids to experience their childhood they grew up with. Because, I had fond memories of my childhood, like playing with the neighborhood, playing with the neighborhood kids, like things like that. So, you want your kids to experience probably similar. The truth of the matter, though, is if I'm really being honest, it's no longer that day and age anymore. Right? Like, constantly changing. Everyone's on their phones, things happen. Like, it's not going to be a repeat of my childhood. Now, there's probably like, I'm sure Eric, like, quote unquote, I'll call it downsides, but like other ways of thinking about it if you have a fully nomadic family, like, maybe you don't see your extended family as often as much as you normally would, things like that. But I think there's like kind of what you're saying is you weigh the pros and cons of it and you decide what's best for your family and you go from there. But you could still have the like quintessential experiences other places. It doesn't mean you have to do it in your hometown.
Exactly. Our life looks very similar, except for the four walls we live within and the restaurants and food we eat. Every time we relocate. So we are always able to plug into a church wherever we are. Sometimes we've been the only English speakers in the church. And when we were in Peru, that was a unique experience. But and at that point, none of us spoke any Spanish at all. But it still worked out. We had this commonality still with these people. So we've always found community. Thankfully, through like I don't know how we would. I know a lot of nomads struggle with community, so that's why a lot of families travel together. Like 3, 4, 5 families will get together, and I know families that travel together and they hire a teacher, and the teacher goes with them, and like that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But because of the fact we always plug into a church, we always instantly have community wherever we land.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. How have your kids like, well, question before that. What do you think is like the golden age of traveling with kids? Like, for example, I don't know if you would say, hey, by the time they're 17, they want their own life, or you want to put them in sports in a school. So maybe 8 to 9 years old is golden. Like, do you have thoughts around what age is quote unquote best for this type of lifestyle?
Yeah, but it's just from our personal experience. I'm sure if you talk to somebody that had a different, unique experience, they might say something different. Because again, our kids have all got to do sports. They've all been in sports clubs. Right now, our youngest, he has signed up here in a couple weeks to go to a second World Rubik's Cube solving competition. He's gotten really into that, so we're doing a second one here for that. But I couldn't imagine doing this if we needed all of the baby stuff that goes along with having a baby, the baby carrier, the car seat. We like the fact that, and our youngest was 9, 8 at the time when we did our test trip and stuff. We like the fact that we can say, okay, everybody get your shoes on, and they can put their own stinking shoes on, or like, okay, everybody go pack. It's packing day. And we've got this down to a science. Like, we can have our Airbnb packed up in about 2 hours, and we're ready to go. We leave, and then we're set up within an hour of arriving to an Airbnb. We've got some checklists and some things we do. We travel with carry-on luggage only, so we're extreme minimalist as far as the things that we have. And our kids have adjusted to that wonderfully. They do great with it. And so, yeah, so for me, that when they're old enough to carry their own I wouldn't want to do this if I had to carry their luggage. Oh,
yeah,
that would be terrible. So that's why we like the age we're in. But they really have. I never know what accent I'm going to hear coming out of the speaker of one of our kids' devices.
Yeah,
because they have best friends now all over the world. I never know. There's a one of their buddies from New Zealand. They could be talking to one of their buddies from New Zealand, Costa Rica, El Salvador. Our daughter still has friends from Turkey, and they've got new friends here in Liverpool already, and we've been here 8 weeks. And they got our 17-year-old once a week goes with a group of guys and plays football every week with them. And so so I like this age, above 8.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Eric, how do you decide how long to stay in a certain place, and how do you decide where to go?
Whatever my wife says. Oh, happy wife, happy life.
There
Um,
we go.
we just have different things we look for each time. Um, we were only going to be here for 2 months, but we were enjoying it. Things were going great, so we reached out to the landlord and we said, "Hey, would this be available for another 2 months?" And they said, "Yeah." So we said, "Okay." So we extended it for 2 months, and no real rhyme or reason, just where do we want to go to next?
Hmm. Interesting. And what's the shortest amount of time you stayed in a place that you thought you were going to live in, and what's the longest?
So Costa Rica was the longest by a significant amount. I mean, out of we've been in 15 countries, and Costa Rica was a year of that. So that's a lot.
Hmm.
And 38 cities, and that we've lived in Airbnbs. And so that was being in one for one of the, over three and so years, almost 3.5 years. That was a lot. The shortest time, oh man, I don't, well, maybe, I think we were only in Mexico City for maybe 2 months in Mexico. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
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 somewhere around that.
yeah.
And Eric, if people listen to this, they might think like, dude, that sounds like they're expensive. You're buying 6 plane tickets, you're traveling full time. That's extremely pricey. Can you walk me through some of the costs and how if someone wants to repeat a lifestyle like you have, how much would that actually cost them?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this because I think this is the question that, or when I talk to people about this or my wife shares it, like they're totally shocked. So again, this number is going to work if you're from a westernized, country. If you're from
Yep.
Bulgaria, this number is going to seem like unimaginable to you. But from the United States, we live on $8,000 a month, and that includes our travel. We have to put about $1,000 a month aside to build up a relocation fund.
Yep.
But we just work. We took our budget from the United States and we said, okay, this is our budget. Like we're going to spend $2,000 a month on food. Now, in places like England, we eat most of our meals at home. All right, we don't eat out that much. But when we're in Buenos Aires, we're eating out almost every night. When we were in Turkey, we ate out sometimes 2 times a day. So we take our budget and we make our budget work within whatever country we're in. And so, yeah, that's how we do it. We self-fund our medical. Healthcare cost is like dirt cheap. So we put a little bit aside each month. And it's just always been what we've needed for medical. We just self-fund. We have a healthcare plan that is kind of for a big catastrophe, or
Mm.
major medical thing.
Yep.
So yeah, so it's really not that expensive. We're not on perpetual vacation.
Yeah.
We do self-guided tours, and now with AI, it's even better. So our kid, we like museums and things like that. I've loved giving all of my kids ChatGPT on their phone because they can take a picture of a piece of artwork, a painting, a display in a museum, and be like, "Tell me about this."
Yep.
And they get a whole history of it. So our ChatGPT is now pretty much our tour guide. We did a whole
Yeah.
family Beatles thing. We're in Liverpool. So we went on a whole thing and we walked like 6 miles Saturday exploring Beatles sites, and we did it all with AI as our guide. So it was kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. Eric, as we wrap up here, if people want to get a hold of you, learn more about the marketing service, learn more about this lifestyle, can you tell us where they could find you? Can you tell us about your wife's podcast as well, so people could listen in as well?
Sure, absolutely. So if people just go to ericdingler.com, that's going to forward them to my LinkedIn. So that's the place I'm most active and accessible is on LinkedIn. So I'd love to just have people connect with me there that, follow me on LinkedIn, and then you can DM me, ask questions. My wife's podcast is the Digital Nomad Family podcast. Her name is Marissa, and she talks about all the family side of stuff, travel, Airbnb setup, schooling, healthcare, relationships with extended family back home. How do we maintain relationships, and what do we do, and just how do we help our kids transition? Every time we move, there is a loss for our kids, and so we've had to learn systems and processes, which sounds very business, I know, but we've had to learn methods, strategies, to help our kids transition well. And so there's a series of questions we ask our kids starting in the last week to help them process where we are, help them process the next move well, and not make it all about, you're so lucky to live this lifestyle. We do have to help them process it. So my wife talks about that a lot on Digital Nomad Family Podcast. And then I also have then a complimentary one that goes with it, Digital Nomad Entrepreneur Podcast.
Cool.
And sometimes she's on my podcast, sometimes on her and hers. I talk about having a remote business and how do you set up a remote business. And I talk about the funding of this lifestyle. Unless you're already reached financial freedom, I talk about the funding side of it. She talks about the family side of it.
Got it. I love that. We'll put links to all of that in the show notes as well as a link to your LinkedIn. So anyone listening, if you want to connect with Eric, links will be in the show notes. And Eric, thanks so much for hopping on, dude.
Thank you, Neel.